All right. Good afternoon, good evening, everyone, wherever you may be. My name is Angelo Dur. I'm the community manager at Ushahidi. Thank you for taking your time to join us this afternoon or evening for an interesting discussion revolving around V3 features and toolkit development. I have a couple of people on the call with me. We have Anagya Vadana, just Anagya, mind waving. That's our product manager on V3. We have John Crowley, who's been amazing and has been helping us out a lot with toolkit development. Say hi, John.
Hi there.
And then we have Sarah Jane Tupp, who's a member of our V3 team. Say hi, Sarah.
Hi there.
And last but not least, we have Woody, who's our project manager for V3. You've seen him on a couple of calls before. Yeah. So we released another beta version of Ushahidi version 3 last week. And in the lead up to that, we've had two meetups. One where we took you through a demo of how exactly Ushahidi version 3 looks like right now. And then another one to walk our developers through exactly what it would mean to jump into the code, a code walkthrough generally. Today, what we want to do is take you through what exactly we're planning in the lead up to the V3 launch, as well as give you an update on what we're doing in terms of toolkit development and documentation in terms of guides and all of that, so that you can give us your feedback on what pieces are missing or if there are any features or any items within the toolkit that are missing. Without further ado, I'll hand it over to Sarah to kind of give us a little overview of exactly what's been happening on V3 development currently. Sarah?
Okay, I'm not sure I'm the best person to say everything that's happening on V3 development, but I can speak about some of the features. So Woody has built this wonderful list. Can I screen share? Is that okay?
Yes, you can. I'll also share the link on the showcase and on the test page too.
So,
okay, good.
So, okay. Oh my God. That doesn't look right. Can you see the platform board? Can anyone hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Sarah.
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, brilliant. So Woody has built this beautiful list. You just have to go to fabricatorushahidi.com, project board 1. It's pretty easy to find. And it shows what we're doing, what we're thinking of doing, and what's going out in the release, and what you as a community can work on without tripping over the rest of us. So there's the bits you're probably going to want to know about right now. So that's what's coming out in v3.0 soon. So we've got nicer installers, we've got an API Explorer, so you can kind of go see what's happening with your API calls. Custom forms coming through. You can read the rest. I guess important in there is the localization, which is a big lump of work. Then there's the second list, which is what's happening after that release. So we're putting in things like workflows. There's other bits and pieces which aren't there yet, like the sensors input. I'm thinking they'll probably come as part of the plugin theme part. The things we're working on right now, so you can play along with us, is the in progress column. And the things that haven't got anywhere to go yet, but will, is the backlog. And the community features. These are things that you can build as a community member, and they won't interact with the things that are happening over here. So that's the board. You can go have a look at the board and see what's happening when. Backing that up is we're also doing some work tracking down all of the features out of V2 and all of the feature requests that people have made. And those are all over the internet. So this is the list that we have. Again, it's a fairly easy to find thing. You go into Ushahidi Wiki, the Ushahidi Wiki. You go into Platform v3, then down to Getting Involved, and then down to Roadmap. That link there just links back to the platform board we were just on. And these are all the places we're looking. So as community, if you can see anything anywhere that features have been listed for Ushahidi that isn't on that list, tell me. Add it to the list. Then we've got a much, much better chance of catching the features that are important to you. And I think that is pretty much it on features. Now I have to work out how to stop screen sharing. Oh, done.
Thank you, Sarah. So I know that this is actually a question that I've asked internally, and this is probably something that the rest of the community would also be wondering about. So it would be good to get clarification on it. And this is a question for both for you, Woody, and Anagya. I think one of the biggest things that would be really important for people who are on Ushahidi version 2.x moving on to version 3 is really the migration script and the migration process. So I noticed that that's actually been put on the post V3 launch board. So maybe we could explain a little bit more about the reasoning behind that so that it's a little clear on what exactly we're doing on that.
Well, if you're going to migrate, you need somewhere to migrate to. And whilst V3 is still being built out, and Woody, correct me if I'm wrong here, there's no point building a translation from V2 to V3 if V3 isn't completely stabilized. Woody? Yeah, okay.
All right. How about workflows?
Ah, yes. Well, these are big things. The example projects we've got, and Anagya can talk to what the workflows and those are, kicking up some really interesting new ideas for workflow and new needs. Also still got the workflow needs that we had from before. For instance, the ways to manage multiple teams working pipelines through different parts of the system. So I think in terms of crisis mapping, where you have collection, you have triage, you have geolocation, down to verification, where you go through this series, but there's a different team responsible for each of those pieces. So that to me is workflow. Now Inagi?
Yeah, I can jump in a little bit. You know, we're seeing a lot of really interesting use cases as we think through V3 right now. So we're working with 5 amazing partners spread across the globe, and we're pivoting a little bit. It's not just a traditional crisis response. These are organizations and companies that are providing services and products to people. These are very basic services and products, so access to water, access to sanitation in slums, things like that. And we're seeing that these organizations, they have a lot of data, so they have information about their clients. They have information about locations, like where is a hospital located or where is the closest porta potty or something like that. But you know, the information is really fragmented. The data is sitting in thousands of spreadsheets. And for one example is like they may have one spreadsheet that has information about a microloan that they gave someone, and they may have another spreadsheet that has information about what is the poverty status of that person, and they really have no way of having those 2 pieces of information speak to each other. So there's a lot of really interesting things. A lot of them we see, you know, like Sarah said, want the ability to talk to each other, be able to have the team communicate, have information flow in a proper direction. And then the biggest thing we're seeing is a ticketing type of system that they're requesting. So some way to do case management, whether that is to say that a system is down, or whether that is to say we have a new idea for how we can tackle poverty or whatever. So it's been really cool.
All right, thanks, Anagya.
Angela, your second is that I know you've been working on how to get the community to tell you about their workflows. So I think we'll drop that into the conversation, but maybe not talk much about it because John has to talk.
Yes, he does. That was actually something I was going to mention at the very end, but it's fine. I actually had another question. So looking at this board as it is right now, it looks like it's pretty fixed. So if what would the process be if we had a very big number of community members saying that, you know what, we actually feel like this feature is really important to us? What would the process look like? and what are the probabilities that something that they escalate would actually get put into one of the other boards, like having it move around generally?
Actually, every 2 weeks, Anargia, Woody, and myself have something called a Bits Features Truth discussion. And I'm just finding you the link to put into the Hangout. So basically, I represent features, the things that people want. And Woody represents the bits, which is the technology that we need to build to make those. And Anargia represents the truth, which is the realistic, we've only got so many people, or we've only got so many resources, or this is something desperately needed. So we have this contained discussion between the three of us about what's important, what needs to be up or down on the boards. So basically, as community, you put the features you want into the fabricator boards, and that goes into part of that discussion.
All right, thank you, Sarah. Woody, do you have any other comments on that, or any advice that you want to give to people out there?
No, I guess specifically on the workflows question, I wasn't sure that was completely answered. The reason that workflows is not going to make it into this release is because it represents workflows is sort of a overarching concept on top of the existing features that we have. And so what we already have in the system for 3.0 will have all of the same stuff as workflows. Workflows is a way to organize it in a slightly better way and to make it more team-oriented. And so we simply don't have the bandwidth with the amount of time that we have left to implement that, as well as getting the required features done. So we'll be working on workflows heavily for the 3.1 release instead.
All right, thanks for that update. So I guess what we're going to do is give people a little more time to go through the workboard. For now, I really want us to jump into a discussion on what's going on in terms of toolkit development, because that's one of the other things that has been a really huge pain point for deployers in the past, in that you do have the technology, but you don't really understand exactly what you need to do in terms of planning, or you need some help figuring out how best to manage resources, to process the incoming information. So that's one of the things that we're actually doing in parallel with development of version 3, so that by the time we're launching, we're also giving you, a little game plan on how best to move forward in terms of deploying the software. And we have John Crowley to give us a little update on what him and Jennifer Chan have been doing, and give us a little outline of what he's been doing so far, and for us to see, what gaps possibly could be there, because this is an iterative process, and it's definitely a process we want to include our community in. So, John, without further ado, I think I'm going to hand it over to you.
Angela, thank you. It's really exciting to be working on this with Jennifer Chan. She's been a colleague of mine for years and has been working with Ushahidi for about 4 years now. So this is an opportunity, I think, to take a lot of the information that has been put together by the community and by the developers into one cohesive framework. What we're looking at doing is having really 3 major products come out of the documentation process. One is a overall guide, something that takes you through the life cycle of an Ushahidi project, from thinking about the strategy, the business processes, all the way through the installation, the process of setting up your data model, data collection, the process of mobilizing, getting participation, bringing that information and curating it, i.e. how do you begin to figure out how to geolocate it, cluster it, deduplicate, bring that all the way through verification, and then analyze it, put it out to the reports for the advocacy or the evidence or the data needs that you have for the objective, and then the process for some Ushahidi instances which actually do need to come to an end, and the curation of that data, the security, the issues, the protection issues, and then an explanation of how to get involved deeper in the extension of the V3 code base. A second product that we're looking at is really a toolkit, which is more focused in on the managers, those who have to think through the strategy and the project management of an Ushahidi installation without necessarily getting in the technical details of how version 3 is going to work. So this is really going to be Jennifer Chan's baby, and I'm trying to help her with it as best as I can as we put the whole process together. And then also, there are a bunch of old hands who really just want to know what it's different in V3 and how do they install it, how does it work. And we're going to have a quick start guide for that, and we're putting that together as a separate product. What I'd like to do today is to go through the whole guide, since that's really the more comprehensive bit, and I'll go through some of the approach that we have. Let me bring that up onto screen. We're building everything into GitHub right now, and what we're trying to do is to take stuff that's strewn across blog posts, wikis, slide shares, many of the things that you've struggled to aggregate and make sense out of, and put it into one narrative. So we have an entry point, an easy entry point for each audience. This one, in terms of the guide, will help us move through the process of explaining how the installation is going to work. Excuse me while I just switch screens here. What I'd like to do is to bring you through the basic idea. What I'm trying to do, what Jennifer and I are trying to do, is to look at how do we take the clean code ethos that the team has established for V3 and bring that same concept to the documentation so that we have something that's all in one place, easy to fork, easy to issue pull requests, and begin to set up something so that you can edit the documentation, you can fork it for your own purposes, but it's still all integrated into one place, which is why we're using GitHub pages. We'll have our own build server for that, so we're going to add some custom code in so we can modularize this a bit and also make it so that we can white box it a little bit, so if we have particular installations we can have documentation that meets specific organizations' needs. Let me take you through the basic structure of what we're talking about. We're going to start with the guide by looking at the Ushahidi story. What is Ushahidi? Defining what it is and why you would use it. Beginning to look at how others have used this in the past. What we'll do from there is to jump into some of the pains that we've had on version 2, looking at either the issues of having to pull data together between Skype, Google Docs, Ushahidi, and other platforms into one cohesive place, verification, the rise that we've seen over the time since version 2 of the importance of social media and how to integrate that messaging into the general flow and of making sense out of a particular place. We'll go through and look at, from there, some of the design challenges that Gabriel had discovered when he had interviewed many of you and many of the developers on what the version 3 software might do to begin to address some of these challenges from version 2, and go through this thematically so that we can articulate to our users what were the things that the teams thought through as they began to design version 3. We'll then dive into the key concepts in version 3. What's changed? What's the philosophy? What decisions did the team make in order to implement version 3 and then set up a platform for continued development? This will be the clean code. This will be the headless API. This will be the simplified installation, the unified interface, explaining how that works so that our users understand the basic concepts that they'll be working with the version 3 software. Now, instead of diving directly into, okay, now that you understand that, how to install it, we want to start with a business practice and begin to look at what do you need to reflect upon before you do Ushahidi? Is Ushahidi even the right tool for what you're trying to do? And begin to ask those questions so that we can outline the goals and objectives. Begin to define what is it that you're trying to do with the data? Why are you collecting the data and how are you going to use it? How is it going to enable you to reach your goals? We'll outline deployment types. How have people used Ushahidi to reach their goals for specific types of data collection? And begin to provide some examples of how that's worked. We'll go into the staffing. Ushahidi is not a silver bullet. There are some who have, we've kind of heard in our development circles of who just want to implement Ushahidi, but don't actually understand what's involved. We'll begin to look at what some of the staffing issues. What plans do you have? What roles typically come in place? How do you hire them? What's the training program that's typically in place? Begin to define the crowdsourcing and what you're going to need to do in order to build a campaign so that people come. What are the different types of choices you have and what that campaign would look like? Is it bounded? Is it unbounded? Are you trying to collect information, or are you trying to get a crowd to help you analyze information you've already collected and parsing it out? What type of crowdsourcing are you trying to do? Oftentimes, Ushahidi may fit into a larger ecosystem or a chain of applications which are get piped together so that data come from one place. Ushahidi may be the data collection mechanism that feeds into something that may be a more powerful analytical tool, which may be on your desktop. It may be a GIS. It may be something that allows you to provide the argument to your audience that allows you to do the advocacy or the evidence aggregation that you need. There's also the programmatic partners, who you're working with on the ground. If there's civil society organizations or non-governmental organizations, how do you begin to put them into the chain? What does that look like? All of this, of course, is going to require time and resources, and scheduling how that works is a management problem that sometimes is not often confronted in the initial part of the Ushahidi implementation, and people learn the hard way that they're going to need to figure out how to create structure for the volunteers. They need to understand how the staff and their staff obligations are going to tie into this. That, of course, implies that there's resources from an organization deploying it put into Ushahidi. What does that look like? What do you need to think about as you're building your costing model as to how this might work and what kind of costs you're going to incur? As Ushahidi begins to diversify, there's also a set of products that are coming together from CrowdMap in the cloud, Ushahidi v3, which will be on a server, and then the red carpet and the custom applications that are beginning to come into place. Which one's right for you? Is Ushahidi really the solution you need? And then of those, how do you begin to decide which one you want to install? Now, if you decided that v3 is the platform that you want to use, let's look at how we would install it. What are the tech environments that are necessary? How do you begin to think through the, are you putting this in the cloud? Are you running your own server? Is this running on a laptop? What are the technologies that are necessary for each type of implementation? There will be, in the process, a simplified installation that's coming together, but we'll also outline the manual installation of how you would install it on Unix, Mac, and Windows, with the dependencies and the libraries with a step-by-step for each operating system. We'll also dive into, as this comes online, the migration paths you're needing, and at least thinking through the issues that you'll have, particularly if you customized Ushahidi and are going to need to think through step-by-step what you're going to need to do. From there, you hopefully will have a screen that's going to ask you for your initial setup. What we'd like to do is take you through the first look at a site so that we'll have a chapter which is really, it's not going to dive too deeply into the site, but will at least provide some of the basic outlines of what you're seeing when you log in and you first see the new interface with the workspace and views and posts and messages. Begin to introduce some of the concepts that we'll have through the interface with the screenshots so you see what it's going to look like. And then the first steps you need to take. How do you localize the server? How do you begin to think through the time zones, the languages, and then beginning to set up the site settings? Like how do you begin to add the features back on, put the site name and other configurations that are coming into place. From there, setting up your first sets of users, explaining how roles and permissions work with views so you'll see your different people have different access to different types of data and different types of parts of the administrative interface, which is now all in one place, and how those permissions really are a critical aspect of managing the new unified interface and getting your first users in place so that you can begin to configure the system and have your first trusted users as part of it. Of course, many people want to visualize on maps, setting up those first map visualizations. We'll explain how that works in the new version 3 software and how you're going to be able to use mapping a bit differently. From there, we're going to dive into the data model and thinking through how you're going to use the new custom forms and the new structures in order to collect the data that you need. We're not going to start with the forms. We're going to start with what do you need to do with your data. What is it that you're going to try and do in terms of your advocacy, in terms of your evidence gathering, in terms of your analysis that you need to produce, and from there begin to put together a data model that you'll begin to use in order to create the method. And then from there, dive into the data collection. What are the limits to data collection? What are the privacy issues and security issues that will come there? And begin to think through how do you begin to put that data together. Different deployment types often use different types of data, and we'll provide some specimens from past implementations of how users have customized Ushahidi to collect certain types of data for their use. We're going to, from there, explain how you would configure your posts and messages to start with so we can prepare you for doing the custom forms, and begin to think through how do you do SMS posts, web posts, and then the messages from email and social media, configuring those so that you can get the site up in place. That will include looking at how you set up email, frontline SMS, Nexmo, SMS Sync, Twilio, into the V3 platform. Now we would dive into how do you use the new custom forms to take the form you've already designed to do the work that the strategy work and the data collection work. How do you implement that in the new Managing Forms interface, and how do you use the form builder to create that structure? From there, we'll look at categories and tags, how you begin to use the new tagging system in order to create and categorize those posts and messages, so you begin to think about how to curate them appropriately. We'll also, from here, begin to provide essentially an appendix inside of the chapter of thinking through the spatial resolution. Not everyone needs to collect building data or a exact GPS point. Some need to know things at a neighborhood or block level. Others may need to know it at a district level. What spatial resolution do you need in order to begin to answer your data questions, and how does that relate to the way that you're going to be collecting your data and designing your forms? Now we would dive into deploying the tool, beginning to think through what's the technology preparation that you need to have in order to take the server that you've prepared and prepare it for deployment so it's secure and ready to go with the right people and the right technologists behind it, as well as your staff for how you're going to organize the campaign and begin to run the process of engaging participants in collecting data, or engaging, as we see with many organizations, more of their staff members involved with the collection. We would dive into training. How do you teach Ushahidi to yourself and to your staff? And then how do you instruct the crowd, the participants, on what they need to do with the platform, what they need to do with their phones, what they need to do with the web, what they may need to do with social media, and how to begin to pull that together. We would look at a section on, do you want to simulate your deployment? If it's sufficiently complex or sufficiently sensitive, you may want to send this in a controlled environment so that you begin to understand some of the issues that come into play. We'll provide a short guide for how do you run a sim that will allow for you to do that and come up with some feedback that hopefully will make your campaign more effective. Then we'll go and dive into collecting data, running the campaign itself. What are the issues that you have with the crowd? What do you need to communicate? How do you create the feedback loops? And how do you get feedback on your feedback so that you begin to understand how to improve the process, not only in terms of a quality assurance process, but also a quality improvement process on your data collection, and begin to think through how that's going to work. And those feedback loops, which really are critical to making your implementation a success. From there, we'll dive into curation. What does it mean to curate data? How do you begin to understand the process of curation, and beginning to look at the unified interface as your new friend as the method of doing that, the cleanness of the interface, on how you're going to be able to monitor the various flows of data through the site, and begin to work through the process of taking them in and getting them to verified states, and eventually with 3.1 getting them to workflows to enable that. What are the curation techniques that we've seen emerge as best practices among other Ushahidi instances, and how do they begin to set up workflows between various teams, which may be involved with things like the process here of deduplication, of geolocation, clustering the data, beginning to translate it, and then verify it. How do those processes come together in order to create the flow of information? The new feature of sets is something that will enable us to create more powerful systems for doing that type of work, particularly in filtering on various attributes of the messages and various states of the messages and posts that are coming through Ushahidi. We'll dive into how do you, when you're, the nitty-gritty of how do you manage the individual post, what's involved with the new post, what's its structure, how do you begin to edit and see its history over time. How does that history over time help you understand the evolution of the understanding about the data and about clusters of messages themselves. We would then dive into, as it comes online with 3.1, the workflows, and beginning to look at how workflows will provide a set of features up on top of the features of V3. And then we would also look at, as part of this curation, how do you protect your contributors? How do you think through the privacy issues around the data that you're collecting and begin to set up methods and business processes for dealing with those protection issues? Ultimately, once you have the data, telling the story and analyzing it and beginning to communicate it is something that we'll look at as how Ushahidi's new views and maps and the visualizations that are coming online will help you do that and help you track also with your understanding what data you have and its accuracy and the ability to turn it into analysis. Because Ushahidi is now capable of functioning as a headless API and also will have an export function, that process of tying in third-party applications, whether they're online or on your desktop, is going to be a critical part of many installations, particularly those that are going to be doing more hardcore GIS analysis or will be doing statistical analysis of some form on the data, or tying the data into other data sets and beginning to create some more complex understandings of what's happening on the ground based on fusions of data. We'll go through and look at, in the end, if you have data and you are now you've decided that the campaign has come to a close or the election cycle is over and the data now needs to be archived, what does that look like? How do you both deal with the technical issues of beginning to take the instance down, curating the data, archiving it, putting it under open license or a closed license, and then also how do you communicate with the community and do your evaluation of how well did this go and take it so you can begin to get some lessons learned that you can not only feed into your next instance, but we encourage you to feed back into the overall community so we have a better understanding of how organizations are using V3, how they're using Ushahidi as a whole, to meet their needs and work with communities. We will also dive into the process of how Ushahidi came together and how, I should say, Ushahidi V3 came together, its relationship to the Kohana framework and what it is today, the clean code and the work that Woody and the team have done to re-architect Ushahidi as its new structure, beginning to look at the test-driven, business-driven development process and how that is working within the team. Provide a code tour that we would allow, and hopefully probably have the audio from a code tour we already have from Woody on how things work, beginning to look at a complete cycle of putting code through or putting a process into the code and how that would work, and then looking at extending Ushahidi and then contributing to the core and what does that look like. One thing that we were going to try and do is continue to extend out some of the appendices. Number one of which is probably going to be the Mapping 101. Shadrach Roberts is helping us write that, which will be the explanation of how do you begin to think through the mapping issues, which often don't necessarily get thought through in the initial parts of the strategy, beginning to think through from a GIS perspective of what is it you're collecting, how are you going to use that to draw the GIS analysis, and what does it mean for your mapping. We'll have a chapter also on security, beginning to look at how security would drive different design choices depending on what context you're working in, and then customizing the new interface so that it can, if you need to have it for your own organization, your own organization's brands, what's the process for doing that? And that is the guide in a nutshell The toolkit and the quick start guide will take modules from the guide, and what we'll do is we'll either use them as they are, as modules, or we'll fork them slightly and then have them be kept in parallel as an ancillary explanation, which will make this easy for managers to understand, and then also easy for the experienced hands to get just the bits that they need. All of this will be editable. You'll be able to go into GitHub and do it through their editor. We're also going to enable the pros.io editor put together by Development Seed, which is a bit easier to use and probably will be a little bit more user-friendly. And that will give you the ability to hand it to literally anybody in your team to add to the documentation, fork it for your own needs, and then begin to turn that into a document that you can distribute inside of your own organization. And I think that pretty much concludes the tour. Love to take questions, love to figure out what it is that I missed, what Jen and I missed, and how we can add to it, and if there's particular wish lists that you'd like to see and other things that we can add in and explain, be great. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, John. I think Sarah has a couple of questions for you.
I've got a few for offline, but the big one really is it would be useful to have an appendix on visualizations and what they are and aren't good for, because it's very, very, very easy to do bad ones. It's also very easy to tell the wrong stories.
Sorry, I muted myself. Absolutely agree.
The other thing missed was the import of external data. So at the moment we've got things like GIS shape files. I mean, I don't mean .shp, but vector GIS. But we're also talking about other types of import data. So that's another just one to be aware of.
Yep.
I think I'll stop and give, Robbie, everyone else a chance.
All right. Thank you, Sarah. Does anyone else have any questions for John? Anagya, Robbie, Woody? Okay, Anagya is good. Woody, do you have any? Okay, awesome. Robbie, all good? Okay. So, John, one of the things I remember in a discussion we're having yesterday was around the data models that different different deployments have. Do you want to talk a little bit more onto that and what exactly you need from them in regards to that?
Sorry, mute. Different deployments that we've seen, ultimately we have organizations that have hacked their own models for Ushahidi so that they're able to collect the data fields that they needed for their particular implementation, or have done it through their own workarounds. It would be really useful if we could get a few specimens of those data models and begin to aggregate them so we could see what the typical patterns are and begin to put some data model patterns together.
Right, awesome. That sounds good. And then since we have the repository up on GitHub, then I'm assuming that it's okay for us to share our feedback on there as well, just tagging them as GitHub issues, right?
Absolutely. That's the point.
Okay. Okay. Awesome. So what I'll do is I'll share that link with the rest of the community. I don't see any questions on our event page. So I'm assuming that people are probably still digesting everything that we've discussed today. So we're about 4 minutes into close of the call. So what I'll do is pretty much end it here. What I'd encourage people to do within the next week or so is basically take in everything that we've talked about today. If you missed the call, you can go through this recording or share it with your friends. Have a look at the workboard. Look at the features that we have tagged for the next release. If there's anything that's missing on there, feel free to log on to Fabricator and add in your own. And then as far as the toolkits, please go through it as much as possible. If there's anything that you feel has been missed out, now would be the time to share that with us. And then in the coming weeks, what I'm going to be doing is reaching out to individual deployers who are working on, be it corruption maps, human rights mapping, environmental mapping, and things like that, just to get a little understanding of what your goals have been deploying Ushahidi, what your expected outcomes have been, what are the pain points, what are the things that you like about the platform, so that that kind of work can feed back into the development that we're doing with version 3. So all of that should be in the pipeline, should be coming your way. Without further ado, I'd like to say thank you very much for joining us, and have yourselves a fabulous evening. And we look forward to having you join us again for yet another meetup in the coming week or so. So thanks, everyone. And thanks for all of you joining in on the call today. Bye-bye.
Thank you.